Welcome to Fire University. This is a podcast dedicated to fire ecology and management within the Natural Resource University Podcast Network. My name is Dr. Marcus Lashley. I'm a wildlife biologist, an assistant professor of disturbance ecology at the University of Florida, and a lifelong hunter that's passionate about wildlife conservation and management. In this podcast, I will interview scientists and professionals not only on the latest research in fire ecology, but also about their experiences, in hopes that you as the listeners can learn why fire ecology is important and also how you can use it to meet your natural resource management goals. So let's get to the burning questions in Fire University. Hey everybody, welcome back to Fire University. Today, I'm sitting in person again with a couple of folks we haven't talked to on the podcast before, so you're going to get to hear some new things. I think they've got some pretty exciting things going on and things that you haven't heard that much about, at least on this show. But we're also in person. I'm excited about that because I've been doing a lot of these on Zoom. And, there's something about the face-to-face interaction that really just makes it more fun for everybody. It's good to see y'all and get to hang out and everything. But have Dwayne Elmore, Dr. Dwayne Elmore from Oklahoma State. And I guess you're the extension wildlife specialist, but specialize in a range of things. I think of you as a key player in the gamebird world, especially prairie chickens and quail.
Yeah, that's definitely where my passion is.
Yeah. Well, I think that definitely shows through. But also one of my old lab mates, some of these papers and stuff that you've asked for online that we've shared have inevitably, in some cases, had Dr. Chitwood's name on it. But Dr. Chitwood is now, we'll call you Colter from here on because it's Chitwood. Yeah. He's now at Oklahoma State as well. How long have you been there?
Almost a year and a half now.
Yeah, I figured it was over a year.
It's a pandemic job.
Yeah, pandemic job. Well, yeah,
but a good one.
Good job. Yeah. So you've done a lot of the same, literally the same work that I have, at least through the graduate studies. But got a lot of stuff going on with white-tailed deer and turkeys and probably some other things that I don't even know about.
Yeah, we're doing some camera work. Right when I got to Oklahoma State, kind of deer and turkey focused, trying to do abundance estimation with cameras, and then started working with Dwayne here on a big turkey project statewide for the next 4 to 5 years, and then also working on pronghorn. So if you ever need to know about pronghorn,
I do. It turns out I don't really know that much about pronghorn.
Yeah, Oklahoma Panhandle. We put out 100 collars back in February.
Oh wow, very cool. Mm-hmm. Did you ever think you'd be doing pronghorn work?
No, but I've always wanted to. Yeah. I've liked them since I was a kid.
I have too. They kind of look weird, and I just I can relate to that.
Yeah,
they are a little odd.
Very unique species, and I spent some time, as you know, before I was at OSU. I was at the University of Montana, and so I worked on elk and wolves, and I've always wanted to work on pronghorn, and I figured the longer I stayed in Montana, it might happen there. And then, ironically enough, within, literal weeks of moving to OSU, I was working up a pronghorn proposal. So
well, there you go.
Yeah,
working on one end of the state, and
yeah, that is true. I currently have, or at least with my colleagues, we have GPS points in New Mexico and in Arkansas. It's from west to east, where we've got pronghorn that have drifted out of, to the west into New Mexico. And then we've actually got at least one hen turkey that crossed into Arkansas.
Oh, I thought you were going to say a pronghorn. I was like, what?
No,
come on,
that'd be a little far. Yeah.
I'm rode in the back of a truck.
But one wayward hen that's hanging out in Arkansas. So
interesting. Pretty cool. Well, I'm excited to talk to you guys about several of the things that you've been doing, but I thought one of with the folks, the general feedback we get, I guess, the strong interest in game birds, they'd probably be interested to talk about some of that work, particularly as it relates to fire management and habitat. And I have been particularly interested in some of the thermal landscape stuff that you guys have worked on. And I think that'd be interesting to talk about if you guys want to dive into that. And then I don't know if the turkey work has any fire angle, but I know that it's certainly interesting. So we can see what's going on with that too if you want to.
Yeah. Well, the turkey work doesn't have, fire per se, but there's a landscape component. We're getting GPS data on hens. We're focused on hens to be focused on nesting and poult survival, kind of standard, population metrics. But the surrounding landscape, how it's managed, public versus private, forestry practices, that stuff will matter, even though it's kind of maybe a secondary objective, for the work we're doing now. But maybe I'll start with one that you worked on that at Fort Bragg. We had the turkey food work that we did with fire. Turkey and quail. That's right. About the quail folks.
I know that we have at least 2 listeners that are in longleaf sandhill because they've emailed me. There's probably more of them, but 2 of them have emailed me about quail and turkey in longleaf and the same kind of system and we're wondering about fire regimes. So we'll have at least 2 people on the edge of their seat right here. So what you?
Well, we'll just drop a little knowledge bomb right now that we got interested years ago when we were working at Fort Bragg, which I'm sure your listeners have heard plenty of your stories about the fire regime there. But the nuts and bolts of it was there was discussion about how frequently should we burn, and there was some pressure from some folks. Well, maybe we could burn even more. Fort Bragg, on average is burning growing season every 3 years, really intensive, large burn blocks, a lot of homogeneity in that respect. And so we got curious about, not just necessarily the easy thing, let's strap some transmitters on stuff and see how deer move on landscape, which is part of your work. We decided, well, maybe we actually care about what quail and turkeys eat, right? And this is perfect for this time of year, right? We're kind of in the spring, so now you got poults, and everybody knows about the value of the bug life, and so
it's late summer in Florida right now.
Oh, right. Well, yeah, a week of winter,
early June.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, sorry, we're a little different in Oklahoma, although we're finally getting rain. So
yeah, I saw you had some snow on the back porch.
It's not quite that bad. I was wearing a hoodie though last week. So anyway, the test that we did was really focused on how macroarthropods, right? That's the fancy word for the bugs that
just means big bug, right?
Yeah, exactly. There you go.
Thanks for the clarification.
How they
it's
really intelligent.
yeah. I'm trying to leave out the complicated Latin names, but in all seriousness, there's a bunch of different taxa that those game species that we all like to chase that they eat. And so the whole point was to see how this fire regime in an experimental way might affect the bug life that turkeys and quail depend on. And obviously this is not the time to present graphs and stuff, but I can jump straight to it.
I can't see the graph.
Yeah. Well,
that's what they're saying right now.
Yeah, like what graph?
You've seen a bug's life, though. When that big bird comes in and he tries to eat all the grasshoppers, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, that's right.
That's what we're rooting for the big bird.
Yeah, we
want them to get the bug.
Yeah, we want them to get that bug.
And we need the grasshoppers and crickets to be there. And what we learned was that, by and large, certainly bugs weren't going to go extinct based on our data, even with those bigger burn blocks that we've talked about before. But not all the taxa responded the same way. And so it's interesting to see that, like, particularly spiders, grasshoppers and crickets kind of in the same group, they did respond in a different way. And we saw declines immediately following fire, which you can figure, okay, well, we expect that. There's going to be some mortality. Birds are still going to get in there and eat some of those that would get fully consumed by the fire. So that's still a brief benefit. But there was a question about, well, how long until their populations are covered? And so in our study, given that we were in a system that's usually burning every 3 years, but we were kind of testing out a scenario where maybe we burn every 1 or 2 years, we found that they did recover. But the longer term question, and this is, fodder for discussion or obviously for us, maybe future research, was whether or not that would happen in perpetuity. In other words, would it be possible to suppress at a local scale that bug life to the point that you can't get new immigrants in, right, to now have a new grasshopper population or a new cricket population. And like I said, based on our data, certainly it wasn't sky is falling scenario, but it was interesting to see that some taxa did respond a little bit differently to the fire, and that's going to scale up to the vertebrates like quail and turkeys that we care about, chasing with a shotgun or whatever.
I think one of the interesting things about fire and how it affects game birds is, there can be interactive effects, and it can affect food resource, like you're talking about, outright abundance, or how many different species of insects might be available. It can also just affect the availability or how effective the predator, in this case turkey or quail or whatever it is, at catching them. We did a study on prairie chickens where we were looking at the prairie chickens were taking their broods to recent burns. They nest in an unburned. I'll say unburned. It'd been burned like 2 years ago.
It's really unburned. It hadn't been burned.
Yeah, because it's tall grass prairie. It all burns very frequently, but they would nest in where there was denser cover. They would immediately take the broods to these burned areas. So we expected, like you found in your study, big difference in insect abundance. Didn't see it. In fact, the key groups like caterpillars and grasshoppers that we knew they would be eating, there was no difference. What there was a difference in structure of the vegetation. So it's probably the availability of those insects. They could actually forage, chase them down and catch them.
Well, something interesting about that, and it's sort of a parallel to both of those ideas. When I was working with you at Fort Bragg, it was sandhill, super poor, 15-foot deep sand. It's poor, and then you go down to like the Red Hills, which we have a fair listening base from. If you burn on 3-year rotation there, it literally will get away from you. That's not fast enough. It's so productive in comparison. But what you're basically shifting that timeline, and it sounds like the prairie chicken work may have been really similar, that where the 3-year rotation would end up in the sandhill with a lot of bare ground that they can really efficiently mobilize in there. It may not be more insects, but they're more efficient at catching them or whatever. Even from my experience with those two sites, the soil productivity changes the length of time that you want in that interval to promote that open foraging ground. By year 2, it's dog hair thick, as we've said before, in there for a little poult or a chick to run around in. It's already getting to that point. By year 3, it's too far.
That's why it's really important for a land or game manager to not get so hung up on a specific prescription, but just become competent in knowing what your target species habitat looks like, and then tailor the fire or timber harvest or whatever it is for your objective.
And likewise, that heterogeneity and frequency, or in the spatial extent of the burn, that's back to availability, because we talked about that a lot at Fort Bragg. They did tend to be larger burn blocks, but at shorter, smaller parcel sizes, like kind of average landowner, particularly if they broke their property up into 2 or 3 different burn areas, you're not going to run out of grasshoppers and crickets when you're talking about just a few acres here and there. Whereas we were looking at it on a much larger scale. We're talking about hundreds of acres at a time, if not, depending on how.
Sometimes a arrangement, it could be thousands contiguous.
And so that was a question for the future, is that might have a recovery impact that we don't quite understand yet, but at the scale of the average landowner,
we had I know we've shared it, and some of the listeners have probably looked at it, but we had one where we kind of went through the scale of fire literature to look at that and to see how much data do we have on it. It's not very much. we definitely have this really, we showed one thing just looking at trends in burn block size of land. Private landowners tend to be really small, whereas public landowners in particular places in some cases have very large burn blocks. And, we know based on, it's just a principle of ecology that things are scale dependent, and, having that juxtaposition of different things, easily accessible could be really important. Like you're saying, it may have really good nesting if it's right directly adjacent to very good brooding. Sort of like I guess that's been something that has been championed a lot, I guess, in the quail world for a while.
Yeah.
Is having the early succession paired with the different stages of burning right together, all, wherever you're at on the landscape.
Absolutely. And, we tend to focus, and I say we, I mean, like those of us that chase birds around with radio transmitters, it's our tendency to focus on where they spend most of their time. But sometimes we should back up and say, where do they spend small amounts of time during key periods? Because that can have big survival implications. We did a study a few years ago with Evan Tanner, where we were looking at extreme weather, like these big cold spells, where sometimes we would lose 20% of our quail population in 2 days. I want to know what the quail are doing during that 48-hour period, especially the ones that didn't die.
What did they do that saved them?
And turns out they were in a vegetation type that only occupied about 8% of the landscape. So that's really important. And
so that could be a limiting thing at that point, with it being that little of the landscape.
Even though most of the landscape's not composed of that vegetation, that could be a critical pinch point of getting those animals through stressful periods, high heat, hailstorms, drought, whatever it is.
Yeah, I think it's an important point. I know my instinct has been for a long time. I think I get enough feedback from landowners and hunters that they think the same way. We always think about, like for turkey poults, they're going to get cold and die, but it could just as easily be hot.
Absolutely.
So that thermal refuge could be important, whether it's hot or cold. It might be important for both.
And, when you actually start putting temperature probes on the landscape, which we've done a lot of that, in reference to box turtles and quail and turkeys and prairie chickens, all kinds of stuff, what you find is moving just a couple of feet can be life or death. From me to you could be a difference of 40 degrees Fahrenheit. If you're on a razor thin margin of overheating, that's life or death. You can stand in a spot that's have surface temperature of 125. You might be able to stand there for 5 minutes, but you probably can't stand there for 5 hours. So there's got to be refuge.
Thermal heterogeneity.
And that's why I think it has huge implications to a fire manager. Because if you're trying to make the whole world look the same, you're not giving that animal options.
No, I think that's a really important point. We definitely talk about that a lot on here, the heterogeneity, the mosaic, we say all kinds of ways, but providing opportunity is really what we mean. Like give the animals opportunity to deal with whatever they're challenged with. We had a gopher tortoise project where we had cameras on the gopher tortoise burrows to see what was using them, and we have a couple of quail that were using it to get down in the burrow. It was pretty cool.
That's really
and it happened to be extremely hot. So
that's
cool down there. I don't know if that's why he was doing it.
Keystone species.
Yeah, exactly.
Lots of other animals depend on it.
Like 300 and something have been documented using it. Some of them are endemic to the burrow. They don't exist outside of it. So that's kind of cool. But definitely, an important thing to think about. I don't necessarily think about gopher tortoises being critical to quail, but in a sandhill landscape where you may not have very much thermal refuge, they can be more important than we realize even. It's definitely interesting to think about. We have many instances where quail just run right on down in the tortoise burrow and then they hang out in there for a while. I don't know what they're doing.
Nobody's ever documented a turkey poult taking refuge in a tortoise.
We've got turkey poults on the same study, turkey poults going all around it, foraging in the apron and doing that. I posted some online that people's probably seen, but we don't have any going down in it.
Yeah.
You need to get your little remote control camera and follow on them quail in there.
Yeah, see what he's doing in there?
Yeah, just drive your little
They're probably just,
flashlight on.
you know,
Maybe getting eaten by a diamondback.
It's probably
speaking
a
of,
good way to lose your
speaking of
camera.
weird interactions, that we just got one. We haven't posted it yet, but it's kind of funny because there's a tortoise. He's sitting there at his entrance, you know, with his hind end out, and he's kind of blocking the entrance. And this snake, I swear the thing is longer than me. I don't remember what the species was, but it was one, you know, it was one of the sandhill snakes, and he's 8 foot long. If he's, you know, if he's 8 inches, he's 8 foot. He's out of the camera and in it, you know, both sides.
Yeah.
And that snake came up there, and I guess he got irritated about it, and he grabbed a hold of that tortoise on his leg and just started chewing on him and yanking him around.
He was wanting in the burrow.
I don't know. It looks like he's just trying to eat the tortoise, you know, but he's blocking the entrance. And yeah, and then, I mean, he did it for several, we had him on a video, so we've got like 30-second clips. It was several in a row that he's latched onto this tortoise. That tortoise ain't even moved. He doesn't care.
He just keeping.
He's like, I'm 80 years old. I'm not worried about
He probably
you.
is. He's a good size one, you know. He probably is 80 years old.
The snake
And he's like,
just crawl on.
that snake, you think you're getting in here?
The cool thing about tortoise is they're creating a whole another level of disturbance, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we talk about fire and timber
Yeah.
management, but they're creating trails,
Mhm.
burrows, aprons. I mean,
Yeah.
and there's different plant communities right
Oh, yeah.
immediately around them.
Yeah, and they're dispersing their central place forager, so they go out and eat all the things they like, and then they carry them back to their burrow and then disturb the soil. And yeah, there's been really cool work. There was one really cool project in South Georgia that showed that the vertebrate diversity in communities was higher when there were tortoises there with active burrows. You know, just like the community as a whole was more diverse with vertebrates. You know, so.
And I think that's, you know, a lot of people call us about managing quail and turkey and deer, but I think it's always good to talk about these other species that'll benefit. If you're having an active fire program in the sandhills, you're going to benefit tortoise and quail. You know, if you have an active fire program out in Oklahoma, you're going to benefit bobwhite. You're also going to benefit box turtles.
Yeah.
You know, so there's lots of non-game species that are going to benefit from these targeted management actions.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good point. I do want to ask you about some of the box turtle stuff that's come up a couple of times.
Yeah.
I know that I get a couple of comments or questions about box turtles, but I know the fire practitioners probably do because it's perceived that that's a species that's really negatively impacted by fire. So I know you did some research on that. I was just curious, you know, if you can give us a rundown on.
Yeah, so there was 2 concurrent studies, one in Oklahoma and then one that Dr. Craig Harper and his student Katie was doing in different study sites in Tennessee. Hers was more focused on fire with Craig Harper. And, you know, big take homes from that is that there was some mortality, but it was mostly associated with the early growing season burns, April. You know, I think there was a little bit of mortality from some summer wildfires. Of course, during the dormant season, the box turtles were all underground, so they weren't vulnerable. But during the growing season, the early growing season in particular, there was some mortality, and which, you know, makes sense. That time of year, they're coming out from their burrows. They're not real active yet. They're not as mobile. So some of them were vulnerable. Now, whether that has population effect, we don't know. You know, that's the big question. Yeah, we'll lose some turtles to fire if the timing is wrong. So what's the hedge against that? Well, the hedge is don't burn the whole world every year, first of all, heterogeneity, and burn in different seasons. If you're burning everything in April for 50 years, well, we don't know, but that could potentially cause some population effects.
If you were going to choose a time to negatively affect them, that would be
That
it.
would be it. But the trade-off is if we shift to a different time of year to burn, it's going to have negative effects of something else. There's always losers and winners with any time we burn.
But and there's losers from not burning.
Absolutely.
As well. Yeah.
Absolutely. Because, even box turtles, there's different subspecies of box turtles, but the one she was working on, we think of as a forest animal, but yet they nest in forest openings. Well, there's several ways you can create those, but fire is a good one. So even they benefit from fire.
I've talked to Katie about this, the graduate student at the time. She's moved on to another job, but she had some really interesting anecdotes. I don't know if you'll talk to her about it, where she was, had them transmitted and they'd go in and one of them would be in a 2-acre home range or whatever, it was small, and be there for weeks or something. And then they'd go light it on fire and the joker would pick up and take off running.
It's amazing how quickly they can move.
Yeah.
They know the fire's coming.
Yeah, they know immediately. And she said they'd run down in a stump hole or run across the fire break or something, and completely lose their home range just by hearing, I guess, the fire coming.
Yeah.
Which is pretty interesting. I think of them as being, when in that April period when they're kind of coming out and they're sluggish. I just think of them being that way all the time.
Right.
But those little jokers can get it if they need to.
That's exactly what I was going to say, because I didn't have any part in this, but I know Craig, of course, and Dwayne and I have talked about this. And when he tells that story about the sluggish ones, it's like, I think that's a key point is these turtles are in systems that burned. Like, they're slower than a rabbit or a white-tailed deer, and they can't fly away like a quail. But when they want to go, except maybe right when they're coming out of kind of a dormancy period, they can go. And so I think that's the head. Dwayne was talking about the hedge. Like, that's what's key to remember is if you theoretically, anytime you burn non-dormant anyway, you could be putting them at risk, but probably most of those actually make it because the students saw that they just ran from the fire.
Especially in some of the up on hardwood burns that I've been on, we're intentionally not moving the fire very fast. They can certainly outrun that. If you give them the opportunity. It's the same thing, you could kill longleaf pine with fire. You could, but we're just trying not to do that by using firing techniques and everything, conditions to avoid that. And same thing here. The species could be sensitive at some times, but we can certainly mitigate that.
Yeah, so you can break your burning time up, spread the burns across the year as a hedge. You can also have smaller blocks because, like Katie documented, they're able to move and get out of the way. And to the study in Oklahoma, where we were looking at more thermal refuge, temperature refuge, but it was in a fire-prone landscape too. These are different, so to speak. These are prairie box turtles, and they spend a lot of their time out in open prairie. However, when it gets really, really hot, which for a turtle, somewhere around 90 degrees, they do little shallow burrows, not completely underground, but get in cool spots, and they might sit there for 2 weeks and not move. That's amazing. I mean, talk about a boring telemetry project.
Still,
then I know where it's going to be. Yep, same spot. But that's what we found, and those spots were places that didn't burn very often. There weren't many of those spots on the landscape, but they were kind of fire refuge. They were cooler.
Little fire shadow.
And so those, again, kind of back to the quail example, maybe they don't use that all the time, but when it's really hot or really cold, it might be really important. So again,
so were they, if they had that 2-week period, did it happen to be in a droughty time, or was it just temperature driven?
It seemed to be temperature, like heat of the summer. And then we would get like July, it'd be 2 weeks of 90 or 100 degrees. And then we get a rain and it'd cool off for 48 hours and they would cover some ground and they would go out and forage and then they'd go back to just kind of laying low.
Well, just thinking about that from a natural standpoint with fire, when it's really hot, I wonder if that'd be the time that it'd be more likely to burn naturally just from lightning or whatever.
Yeah, well, it depends on what part of the country we're talking about. Where we did that study, most of the fires were human caused.
Yeah.
But in other areas, like, there would have been a lot of lightning strikes during those summer periods. Yeah.
I got a random turtle story. You want to hear it right now?
Well, yeah.
Depends on if it's going to be good.
Well, you already heard it.
Could you, before you did that, could you stop touching the microphone?
Yeah,
What are you doing?
I don't know what to do with my hands.
We've been joking about that before that. He kept bringing that up.
No, since we're talking about turtles, and again,
I like turtles.
It's one of those things. The time of year, you see them out moving around in the spring, early summer, and they get in the roads, of course. And most folks, certainly professionals, heard this, but maybe listeners have too. That if you're trying to give a turtle an assistance, if they're going across the road from this side to that, move them in the same direction they're going, but get them across the road so they don't get hit, right? Well, right before I was going across, this is in Stillwater at my house in Oklahoma, and I was leaving to go across town, and I saw a turtle in the road. It's a pretty busy road, and I was worried, it's going to get hit, but the sucker was going with the roads. I didn't know which way he's going.
With the flow.
He's going with the way.
We have to figure out why is the turtle crossing the road?
Exactly. I'm trying to figure it out. So I'm sitting there at the stop sign. There's nobody around, and I'm sitting there thinking, well, I'm safely. I got to get
You're
the
at the
turtle.
stop sign watching the turtle.
I'm watching the turtle.
I'm envisioning this.
He's on the way to my house. So I get the story right after all this
Well, I
happens.
yielded to the turtle. I mean, if I want to
You
make a
yielded.
left turn, I couldn't. The turtle's in front of me. But so I jumped out. I got him out of the road.
I'm going to stop you.
Okay,
Just
yeah.
my naive,
Mhm.
not living out there, but my vision right now, I just need you to know what it is.
Okay.
It's kind of like that tin cup. You know what I'm talking about?
It looks like a barren
It's
wasteland.
like, no, you got the turtle right there on the road, and the tumbleweed goes across. I know that's not what it's.
I know the
We're
same.
not quite that
It's
dry.
not quite that
I know,
dry.
but that's what was in my head. And I just
Yeah.
needed you to know that
That
was
would make a better
the middle.
story.
The middle.
Listeners want to visualize that.
Right.
Right. Go with it.
They can, but yeah.
And it was an
so-
armadillo in tin cup.
And we do have armadillos periodically across the yard.
Most of them are dead with their feet up in the road.
Yeah, that's
typically
right.
where they're at.
Well, this turtle, no armadillo. Turtle's very much
No
alive.
tumbleweed.
I get out there and get it, and I'm thinking, I'm like, well, it's going west, but that's parallel to the road. So I just, it's a neighbor across the street, and so I just go put the turtle down, a little bit off the road, but in his yard. And so I go back, I'm gonna get in the car and leave, but then I just couldn't help but sit there and watch what the turtle's gonna do, right? And you're this way. I've been around, well, I know Dwayne's this way too, but I've been around you a long time. We sat one time in Florida, you remember, and we watched anoles on the sidewalk. You remember that? We were trying to figure out why, based on their size, what their flight distance, how close they let a human
You've got to
get.
be a little weird and inquisitive to be a scientist.
Yeah,
We're lifetime learners.
That's right.
Yeah, all the listeners that thought Marcus was normal, well,
No,
I'm on here.
there aren't any of those.
Yeah,
I
okay.
promise you.
Well,
They're
so-
listening now. It's like they can't look away.
yeah, it's a train wreck. Yeah, you gotta watch. Yeah.
You can't stop listening.
So
now.
back to the
You just need
turtle.
to share it with your friends. They can't look away either.
Yeah. Well, I'm sitting there looking at the turtle because again, I'm in a neighborhood, so I'm just at the stop sign and I'm looking, and the turtle's kind of parallel on the road. He's moving through. It was just this Bermuda grass in the yard, But he's inching closer. He's coming back over closer to the pavement. And I'd put him down. He was 5 or 6 feet, probably about kind of normal right of way distance. But he's just kind of hedging back toward the pavement. And I'm thinking, well, he's still mostly westbound. But boy, he's surely inclined to go north, which means he needs to be on the other side of the road. And so at this point, like I was even calling my wife, she's still in the house. I'm like, well, maybe she ought to come out here and watch this turtle and help it. And I need to go run away.
Could-
Yeah,
I'm sure she didn't have anything else to do.
right, exactly. Yeah. She was real excited about it. She actually wanted to see the turtle. so
Could
it
you
worked
stop
out.
what you're doing and
Yeah.
guard my turtle?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna need you to come here for a minute.
And she had to walk it's like 60 yards maybe from where she was in the house, out across the driveway, across the road. In that amount of time, this little guy's motor or gal, I didn't actually pay attention to the sex of the turtle, but
Because you can't tell that. by the
you
way.
can.
That's
I
another
didn't-
episode.
I just didn't look. Yeah. And
We'll
so,
have that next.
yeah. So stay tuned. So
It's
it's
not what
motor.
you think.
We'll put a link in the show notes for how you
There you
sex the turtle.
That's
Yeah.
good.
Well, it's already covered the ground now. Talk about motoring away from the fire.
Mhm.
Well, there's no fire here, but man, it's going now. And so I couldn't even wait on Anna to get out there. So I put the car back in park. I get out, I'm like, this sucker wants to be across the road. So now I pick it up, make sure traffic's good. I go across to the north side, again, about 6 or 8 feet on the other side, put it down, turn around, go back, explain to Anna what's happening. And we look, and that thing, I mean, like you shot it out of a cannon. This thing was just getting it. Again, I thought of that story when you talking about
it had a place in my
it wanted to go that way. And yeah, when I saw it, I couldn't tell. But that's why I thought the story would be kind of fun, because you think about them being slow. But we sat there. I mean, Anna was only with me for 30 seconds. And it got out of sight across the street, well into the property across the way, where it was clear now. Yeah, it wanted to go over there. It was trying to get across that paved road. And so anyway, that was my turtle story.
Yeah. Well, I have a fun one as well. Okay. I used to, when I lived in Mississippi, my yard kind of backed down into this little small lake. And I really, the listeners probably know this, but I know that you do at least. I hate mowing the grass. I mean, it's just, I'm pushing a mower around or sitting on one, it doesn't matter. But I'm just sitting there thinking about how much of a waste of time it is the whole time, because it's just going to grow back and I'm going to have to do it next week again. And that doesn't make any sense to me. So everywhere I've lived, we've slowly, like my yard now, I mean, it's an old field community nearly in its entirety. And, I burned it the other week. Oh, yeah, there was a hen in there a couple of weeks ago.
Is that right?
Yeah, saw the hen in the yard. And if you saw where it was, you thought, wait a minute, why is there a hen here? Because that's the only old field, it turns out, in the county, probably. Anyway, I started I was doing mosaic mowing. That's what I was calling it to my spouse, Christine. And what was happening is we were having these forbs that were really pretty flowers pop up every time I'd miss a little spot. And every time one came up and bloomed, and we had erigeron and, all these pretty asters and Asclepius, the butterfly milkweed, all these different things were coming up. And every time one came up, I just stopped mowing that patch. Well, they would cluster up. So my yard ended up, the whole thing all the way down to the lake was this mosaic of patches of forbs. That's what we're talking about, wildflowers, essentially. And all these little clusters were in the yard. And I probably had 6 or 8 of them. And, it's probably an acre of yard. So it's pretty good size. And when it came the time, all the pond sliders down there in the lake got ready to come nest. Well, they all came up into the yard, and I started noticing they were nesting in the little clumps of the flowers in the yard that I was mowing. And when she saw that, she was like, all right, we're about to have a mosaic mowing yard. Every time flowers showed up.
The turtles won her over.
The turtles. It was the turtles that time.
Just less.
Yeah, and then I had less mow.
Yard to mow. That's great. Yeah.
Yeah. I really don't. This, I got her again. On this one. We have deer frequently in the yard, and she got a couple of rose bushes. One's Evelyn Rose. My daughter's named Evelyn. It's right by her window. And last year we had a doe and a fawn come in the yard and ate the buds off of all the roses. And she was upset about it. So this year I was like, look, I'm going to create a buffer around the yard right here. I'm going to kill all this grass. I don't want to mow it anymore. And I'm going to quickly transition this. And this year there's a lot of wildflowers in it and everything. And the doe and fawn have come out and eaten all in that. We saw them a couple of days ago. Right in the middle of the day, they're out there, picking around in it. And we have pulled flowers off of the roses this year. She's gotten several cuts. And she said just the other day, she was like, you created that buffer and now they're not eating my roses. And I don't know if that's why, but that's the story.
Yeah.
That's the story.
It does sound like
we've got punkweed bushes. They look like trees in the yard.
That's awesome.
They're big.
I was just telling Dwayne, as you know from back in the day, pokeweed's one of my favorites. And I was just telling him, late last week, we were doing a site visit and told him about the times that remember those real big ones at Fort Bragg, like canopy style pokeweed, and we snapped them off.
Oh yeah.
He said, you hinge cut a pokeweed? Yes, well, we hinge broke. I don't know what you call that.
It needs to be like a new article, hinge cutting pokeweed.
Remember, and we came back to them. I mean, we were visiting that site pretty frequent.
Yeah,
So we were doing
an X18, I believe.
Yeah, it was like the X26 opening near there, but
it's right next to it.
I have no idea what you're talking
well,
You don't need
our little areas.
There's probably
Neither
like
does
2 or 3
anybody
listeners
else.
from Fort Bragg that know where.
Somebody's taking notes going, next time I sign out, I'm gonna hunt there.
Yeah, I know where the poke
But-
Hinge cut
But
pokeweed.
that's what we did, and we came back to it, and the deer had destroyed the vegetation they could now reach, those pokeweed bushes.
Yeah.
That
Well,
was
wasn't
cool.
Marcus also the one that pulled all that? What
I
was
told you about your honeysuckle.
honeysuckle
You
out
never
of the
got
tree.
honeysuckle
He
bait
just
Oh, when I
put a
put-
camera on it, watched it
Yeah.
shrink.
Oh yeah,
told you
that
about
was
that.
cool. I wish I still had that. That'd be good show,
Yeah,
folks.
yeah. I told him
Maybe
your
they
photos would be
really
like a
put
flip
on your
book.
social
Yeah.
media.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be good.
It-
You know, funny thing about the pokeweed, last year it was on March 2nd, I believe. No, it was during turkey season, so it'd have been April 2nd. It was on the 2nd of one of the months. But the pokeweed, I got this trophy pokeweed plant in the yard, and it grows, it's a 4, but it's growing from rootstock every year. And it's at least 3 years old because that's how long it lived there. So it was growing, and I was like, this is remarkable. The speed at which, and I'd come home from turkey hunting, and I was standing there in my turkey hunting gear, and I was like, I'm gonna burn this thing down. So I went and got the drip torch. Christine actually filmed it. I have video of
It's
this
in your yard.
in my yard, right there by the window of the house. And I was like, I'm gonna burn this pokeweed down. I'm gonna put a time-lapse camera on it, see how fast it can grow. Anybody want to take a gander how fast it can grow?
You burned
It's a big old, I mean, we're talking
Like
about a tree trunk.
Per
so-
week or day?
I was going to measure it per week, but it turned out I didn't need to. So I got one of those bean pole posts, to put in your garden, and I laid it down, and I had a transect tape. So I put the transect tape on it and marked it in 1-inch increments, and stuck that up right there and put the time lapse so I could see, how many inches. How many inches a day do y'all think it grew?
Almost like 2.
2 inches a day.
I was gonna say 2 or 3.
It was 4.
4.
And it sustained that all the way until it was out of the measurements.
Again, high enough. I mean,
Yeah.
how high do your measurements go?
It was probably 4 feet.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And I'm sure you have told the listeners what an important wildlife plant that is.
Oh, it's unbelievably
It's
important.
fantastic.
Yeah, it's great.
The plant, the fruit,
Mhm.
in the fall, sometimes you'll see bobwhite, their bib is just purple. They're just
Well-
literally drunk on it.
Yeah.
It's all fermented.
Yeah. Well, I know Chiwood been there. We went down in the low country in North Carolina dove hunting. And I don't know if you remember this, but we were looking in the crops of them. And there was some doves that were stuffed packed full of it, even though the entire place, it's like 1,000 acres that they're managing for doves with all these things planted.
Mostly sunflower. And
Yeah.
we were at, and
Yeah.
you're right. We killed some doves that I think we killed a couple that we couldn't find the sunflower, but
Yeah.
the
But they
ditch
were-
rows in between were
Yeah.
all choked full of pokeweed. And
We were using that as cover. We were sitting under the
Yeah.
pokeweed in our thermal refuge. And
Yeah.
the doves were landing in there and going all under the pokeweed and just gorging
And
themselves
yet
on
there's
it.
no telling how much of that is pulled up, mowed up, or sprayed every year.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just people just maybe didn't know.
I'm gonna have like a mosaic of pokeweed and all kinds of wildflowers in my yard.
Yeah.
It's spreading quick.
By the way, I know Dwayne wasn't surprised, but he almost looked surprised when you were going to burn in your yard. But we also, at the field house, when we stayed at Fort Bragg, we burned rings around the longleaf that were in the yard.
Yeah.
Yeah, released them.
Released them
In
in the
my
grass
grass
station.
station.
Yeah.
And they take off. What do you do?
Oh yeah.
Which of course
We need to go back.
we need
and
to
see.
get. I was gonna say we don't. Obviously, we didn't own that
We'll get
land,
that.
but we thought maybe somebody could drive by and see how it's doing. But yeah, we went.
I forgot about the longleaf.
I remember when we did that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the same thing. It's just driven by curiosity. You get an idea and like, well, I was curious how fast can pokeweed regenerate after fire, and it turns out I have a plant right there that I can see. I don't, take your necessary precautions, and I had a fire break around.
Yeah, don't burn your house down.
Yeah, don't do anything like that.
Contact your local authorities.
The important thing is that you can learn a lot about what's going on from that curiosity, and you have plenty of opportunity. My daughter was out there. Now she understands the fire and how fast that responded. It still went to fruit, and the cardinals and stuff that were in that thing, it's unbelievable. And I left the camera on it, so I just have all this footage of all these birds and everything eating in that one bush. And it was like, man, I burned that thing down 3 months ago, and now it's 6 foot tall with a full canopy of fruit, and things are just gorging itself. It was really interesting, but I felt like we needed to add that in here.
I'm glad we paused for the pokeweed. It's a worthy plant.
Pokeweed and turtles. I mean,
y'all didn't care for the mosaic mowing. That's going to be corny to watch.
Well, I was thinking Sam Fullendorf when you said that. When you had him on here, did y'all talk about that?
I don't,
because he does that to his yard.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't think we did. I want to ask.
He would have loved that if you brought that up.
Yeah, I don't think I may have. I don't remember now. It's been a while. I'll have to go back and listen to the episode. But yeah, I always get a kick out of that because, first of all, I hate mowing, and people think that's funny for some reason. But the other,
we didn't laugh.
Yeah, y'all were just like straight. It's like, I hate mowing too.
Yeah. We'll get that yard. There's lots of negatives I can list. Yeah.
So, I think that's another good thing that we were talking about before the show that I think people might benefit from thinking about is, you were saying it earlier, Dwayne, that folks aren't going to call us and ask us how to manage for, these pretty flowers. Well, sometimes for pretty flowers, but not that much. But the turtles or whatever, these other things we've been talking about, they may not be calling us asking about that. They're usually, for me, turkeys or deer, sometimes quail, but
I think, most people that have an interest in hunting or fishing or the outdoors, they're probably like us, that they have an innate curiosity about just nature, wildlife, animals, plants. And I think landowners taught me this early on in my career, that I shouldn't assume that people don't care about the things that they don't call me about. Just because somebody calls and says, hey, would you come talk to me about white-tailed deer? Absolutely, be glad to. While I'm there, I'll also talk to you about pokeweed, why it's important to deer, but also why it's important to this insect. And I think that just they resonate with that, because people take pride in land management. Yeah. And if they know they're benefiting lots of species besides maybe the target one, I think that just increases their satisfaction, their commitment to do more land management. And I get really recharged when I see people get excited about lots of different animals.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of our, at least in my part of the world, for sure, a lot of the species of conservation concern, and I say this regularly to folks, a lot of those are associated with early succession and frequent disturbance, and we talk about that plenty, but very commonly we try to relate to a lot of the landowner base, which like to hunt. And I try to use that as an opportunity to say, okay, well, all these things are beneficial to your deer, your turkeys, or whatever. And by the way, here's a whole suite of other things that aren't doing really well they're doing well on your property because you're doing this.
Yeah.
Your target may be to make more turkeys, but you're making more of a lot of things by doing that are, not typically doing well in our landscape now.
So, and I think as people learn more about other species on their property, both animals and plants, they'll see the commonalities where, like the gopher tortoise and the quail, very similar habitat requirements. They'll also start to see species that have different habitat requirements because they're not like one single prescription that everything will benefit from. Right. And that can be a little intimidating at first. It's like, well, I'm always going to negatively affect something. It's like, yes, but if you're doing different things, different parts of your property at different times, you're giving all these species options. So again, it comes back to heterogeneity. And I think to me, that's the important point. And obviously, if you got 40 acres versus 400 acres, there's limits to how much of that you can do. You might have to pick and choose, like, well, I'm going to focus on this group here and this group here. But I think just not getting stuck in a rut and being willing to have variable plant communities and variation in how you disturb it, how you burn it, when you burn it. That's really important.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, in my experience, I know you told a story earlier about this. If you want to share that, we'll be happy to hear that. But one thing that I have found, and I started talking about it more because of it, and it sounded like you have a similar kind of experience, is I'll find landowners they'll be really interested in turkeys or deer, but then we start doing some stuff that's good for those species and they start to see that response. And all of a sudden they see, oh, look at this old field. Now it's a beautiful field of flowers and the whole family likes that. And look at all the pollinators that are responding and, those kinds of things. And then all of a sudden it intrinsically becomes more valuable. Yeah. Just all of the things you're experiencing that you didn't even necessarily really understand would come from it. But then, we value nature and seeing the diversity just intrinsically as value. And I think that's pretty cool. And I've watched it light up people that I wouldn't have expected it from.
Yeah. And, a lot of times some of the species that people might be initially targeting, like if somebody, I've had this happen a lot, like they want to manage for bobwhite and they have 100 acres and they're in a sea of closed canopy forest. It's going to be pretty hard to have bobwhite, in a landscape.
Everyone's singing.
Yeah, you're not going to move 10 coveys a day. I mean, we've got to temper the expectations here. But I'll tell them, like, okay, well, this is what bobwhite habitat's going to look like. And this is how we could manage for it. And I can't promise you're going to ever be able to hunt here, but we're going to try to get a few quail here. But here's a list of species: field sparrow, prairie warbler, and monarch. These other species that are good indicators that they have similar habitat requirements, and you need to be watching for those, because if you see those species and you're doing right by them, then you're doing all you can for bobwhite. Yeah. And then it's up to your neighbors to help you out. And I think that really encourages people. I mean, I've had feedback like, I don't have the bobwhite I was hoping for, but I did hear one. And my gosh, we saw more monarch this year than I've ever seen. And they just light up. Yeah. They realize that for what they have, their resources they have, the amount of land that they have control of, they've done their part. And that's all you can do.
Well, there's also something to be said that, if you have a good relationship with your neighbors and then they say that, and then all of a sudden you start building on, more of a cooperative type of
which has been done a lot in the deer world. Deer cooperatives, highly successful.
Yeah, they've done really well with that. Yeah, we had an episode about that where we were talking about how successful that has been with the deer world and how we could leverage that with other species.
In fact, some of the research we did on bobwhite in the eastern part of Oklahoma that had a big fire and timber management component, we found that the threshold to have bobwhite present on a property was about 700 acres of what we qualify as bobwhite habitat. And I know when I've talked about that in presentations, a lot of landowners, I can see them kind of get deflated because they're like, well, I don't have 700 acres. I didn't say you had to have 700 acres. There just needs to be somewhere in that vicinity or more of habitat. Talk to your neighbors, because they're either pulling their weight or they're not. But it's, the bobwhite doesn't respect the property boundary. It's just looking, it just needs so much available space.
That's interesting. Well, we've been rambling on for a while now. Had a couple of fun stories and all those things. I'm still thinking about the tumbleweed. I really wish that had been part of it.
Pictures. I'm trying to get you a video for next time.
I need to see like a turkey strutting with a tumbleweed going across in front of him.
I need to get you out of Oklahoma, I think. I don't think you know what it looks like.
No,
it's so windy. I've seen them get blown over. they're in strut and they just flip.
No, I've been around on the Noble.
Oh yeah.
A few times and kicked around and been to Stillwater before, but no, it was more about the way you were describing it, and it was painting that scene in Tin Cup where there was the armadillo there. Well, I always like to kind of wind down and give you an opportunity to, provide some take-home messages or take-home stories. If we want to do story time again, we can do that.
Oh man. Oh gosh, story time. One thing I think of a lot from Fort Bragg when we're talking about fire, and this came up also the other day when we were talking about the hinge cutting of pokeweed.
There's going to be a lot of hinge pokeweed.
Was that? Yeah. Hey, break them over. Let the
On
deer
YouTube videos.
Yeah.
They're filming them right now.
That's right. Yeah. Send them in to Marcus here, and he can put them on.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, if it's out of reach, the deer can't reach.
Turns
it.
out they don't have ladders or anything.
But the two stories I was thinking of related to that was the one I shared with Dwayne last week about you pulling the honeysuckle down. That's Japanese honeysuckle.
Mm-hmm.
So it's non-native.
I was trying to get rid of it.
Right. But you it's that
deer helped you.
It's that curiosity thing though, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you put that camera up, and this was what, a small, it was like 15-acre property you had permission to
it
hunt
was,
on, very small.
15 acres, yeah. And they had a lot of deer kind of getting around in their roses and stuff.
But you just stuck this, I mean, literally looked like just a ball of honeysuckle.
I forgot about that.
And over, it couldn't have been more than about 2 days.
Yeah,
it just
quick.
went, like it shrunk from a beach ball all the way down to just gone, no greenery. So I thought that was cool. And the other one I was thinking about at Fort Bragg was the little black gum tree that we used to go check on. It was in the fire shadow kind of, but it'd been, kind of top killed, but the deer just turned it into a shrub. I mean, it looked like he'd gone in there with hedge trimmers.
Yeah.
The poor little
It's
thing
like a
was
little
just
chia pet or something.
It was a chia pet black gum, yeah. So I think about that one a lot, and just like those neat little things that you can observe, or the landowner can observe. Like Dwayne said, even if you got 5 acres, what little bit you've done, like, I'm just going to mow this in this strip, just see what happens. Or in that case, like you went, I'm going to burn this one pokeberry. I think that's really neat to be able to observe that. And for people that care about deer and turkeys and quail, obviously it's usually because we're interested in game species, but in reality, that's affecting a whole lot of other species.
Yeah. There's probably a lot of value in just shifting your mindset. Every time you go out to your place, wherever that is, and whatever context, think of it as an opportunity to learn.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And along that lines, especially for folks that are maybe just getting started with this, trying to do land management, it can be daunting, and but there's a lot of resources out there to help. And so I just encourage listeners to pick up the phone or send an email, reach out to resource professionals, whether it's wildlife biologists or foresters or whoever. NRCS, there's so many professionals out there that would love to help you, and get them out on your property and spend some time on your property and just pick their brain. They're going to learn from you, and you're going to learn from them. And the other thing is, be persistent, because it might not be the first phone call or first email that connects. Maybe caught that person on a bad day, or they're busy, or the email gets lost. I mean, be persistent. Eventually, one of us will find you. And there's a lot of people out there that would love to help, because we're as excited about wildlife and wildlife management as you are.
Yeah, I think that definitely resonates with me and drives me. I want to see people succeed and have more of all these species, and I genuinely just want that. Get paid the same either way, but I would rather everybody see a lot of success, and obviously the resource benefits, and that's the valuable part and reason I got into this to begin with. And I know you guys are the same. So yeah, may not answer the email immediately, but keep on.
We're probably in the field with somebody else. We'll keep back.
Well, I think that's one thing. It's like, well, we're out helping people often, and then if the email comes while you're on a 10-day trip, it's easy for it to get lost.
Yeah.
So I know there's plenty of people that get frustrated about that, and it's hard to know what's going on in different people's lives and stuff. But there is plenty of help out there. So
Absolutely.
a lot of people passionate about this that are knowledgeable. Well, anything else, guys?
Thanks for spending this time with us. It was fun.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. And I always like to end the show and give you the opportunity, since we've just talked about not being able to find you, how can people find y'all if they're wanting some? So maybe they have a cool story they want to share, or maybe they have some questions or follow up.
Yeah, I live in a hole in central Oklahoma. I'm just kidding. No, email.
Is that where that turtle?
Yeah, I live in there with the turtle. Yeah.
Trying not to overheat.
Yeah, it's my thermal refuge. Yeah, I've got my lab website. Can be found on Google with my name, Colter Chitwood, and then of course I'm on the OSU website. So for me, it's mostly email or phone calls.
Good.
I don't have a big social media presence, but they could also just bother you. Hey,
Well,
Marcus, I'm just kidding.
They might do that. Yeah.
Email is definitely the quickest way. Dwayne.Elmore@okstate.edu.
Okay. Well, so if you have a website link, and then we can put your contact information in the show notes for folks to make it easy to find. And I think we mentioned a couple of papers. We can put the links to those as well.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
We like to try to make everything that we talk about the science. I mean, we have some fun anecdotes, but we also actually have experiments and peer-reviewed processes.
Make it easy to find.
We didn't just make all this up.
Right. Yeah.
Well, we don't want people having to spell Macroarthropod and Orthoptera.
Big bug. Yeah. Well, and a lot of care goes into measuring those things and making sure our peers agree that we've done good science to present to everybody. And then an important role of extension specialists, which was why we're all sitting here doing this, is to extend that to people and make it available. So hopefully people are listening, and if you want to see the link, it'll be in the show notes. All right. Well, thanks, guys. I really appreciate it. Thanks, everybody out there, for listening. We really appreciate everything. Send us an email or a message. Go to your website. We'll see y'all later. Fire University is part of the Natural Resource University podcast network, funded by the Renewable Resources Extension Act. If you like what you heard today in this episode, please follow us on all the social media platforms at UF Deer Lab.